Hello, everyone. Welcome to Little Fantasy. I am your host, Zach. And today I'm so excited for we're having a fun conversation. I get to talk about Ray Bradbury pretty much unimpeded, and I am so excited. I have someone that's just as excited to talk about Ray Bradbury. We've been chatting back and forth about this. Like, we're doing it today? Yeah, we're doing it today. So today I'm going to announce one of my favorite people on the internet, and that would be Jake. And you do one of my favorite YouTube channels. Every time I watch it, I'm always in tears. Why don't you introduce yourself, my friend?
Thanks, Zach. That's very nice. Yeah, I'm Jake, Man Carrying Thing channel. I love Ray Bradbury, and I'm here to like listen to Zach talk because I know he is an enthusiast of Ray Bradbury. I love Ray Bradbury. We share the same birthday, actually, but
Do you?
yeah, August 22nd.
Nice.
Oh yeah, I'm very proud of that. But no, you know a ton about Ray Bradbury, so I'm excited to like pick your brain and talk about it. And this is very exciting for me.
Oh, I'm so scared you're gonna pick my brain afterwards. They're gonna like, yeah, I'm gonna put your brain in a jar or download it to like an iPod or something, and you'll just have all that stuff.
Such a
Um,
gross phrase, pick your brain. I don't know where that came from.
Probably lobotomies. Actually, I guess that's wiggle your brain until it stops working. Yeah. But today we're going to be talking just about Ray Bradbury. So why don't you start this off? Where did you first learn about Ray Bradbury, or what was the first Ray Bradbury book that you read?
Gosh, I probably read like a short story in school or something, like maybe The Foghorn.
Mm.
I don't know exactly, and it also could have just been through YouTube and stuff because no, actually I remember reading A Sound of Thunder. I think that was my first
Mm.
story. Great story. And also like a big thing for me like growing up was because I wanted to be a writer when I was a kid, and I was obsessed with learning about writing, and Ray Bradbury had all of these great interviews and lectures on YouTube. And I remember watching them, and he just talked so passionately about writing that it made me like, oh my god, like this guy is great. I want to write. He's that kind of like person, very very good at talking about writing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, like every time I would see interviews with him, I think the best way to put it is if you're wanted to be like motivation about writing, you listen to him talk, you read the Art and Zen of Writing. He's almost like literary Adderall at times. The second that you listen to him, you're just like, I gotta start writing, I gotta start planning, I gotta start writing every day. And that's something that kind of happens, and especially you can apply a lot of his philosophies to real life. I apply a lot of his stuff to filmmaking or anything that I'm doing, don't think and just wake up every morning, jump on a landmine and pick yourself up during the. Oh, yeah, 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 you got that on the
that's usually
computer.
covering my camera.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I actually have that in my editing room. You can't see it, but I have an editing room and I have a giant whiteboard that just has in like my awful handwriting, don't think, and it's great.
I try to keep my thinking brain on while I'm editing, because I find that when I turn it off, things get really weird. So
Yeah, for me, I actually apply two things when it comes to it. It's a Ray Bradbury thing and a Stephen King thing. It's kill your darlings, but don't think while you're doing it. Because sometimes you can't, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, you won't be emotionally connected to it as long as you're not thinking about it, because you won't be invested. But maybe the thing that you get in the end is probably better than when you started.
right, right.
Yeah.
So I take it you yourself are a writer, correct?
Oh, no, no,
No. Okay.
no, I'm
So
not.
so what is your Ray Bradbury story? How did this come about?
So I think my earliest memory for Ray Bradbury actually comes from I used to live in rural New Mexico, literally on a lane called Green Acres, like the sitcom. And I remember my uncle came to visit from California, and he actually brought me the DVD copy of Something Wicked This Way Comes, the Disney movie. And I remember watching it. This had to have been 2003, 2004. And I only watched it the one time. I still have it on my thing. I've seen it many, more times, but I saw it that one time and it frightened me so bad. But it was always kind of like this lingering feeling. And it wasn't until probably like a year or two later that I started reading. I read the book. And then I remember reading, because I was also a dinosaur kid growing up. I read, Sound of Thunder. I read a lot of his dinosaur stories. But yeah, that beautiful collection, the one that I have, has like a beautiful introduction by Ray Harryhausen as well. But
You
it's
have that? I think I have that
yeah,
too. I love
yeah, it has it's like a paperback with like a cool dinosaur on it.
Dinosaur Tales.
Yeah, yeah, Dinosaur Tales. I remember seeing the awful A Sound of Thunder movie. I think that has like Ben Kingsley in it.
I
That
didn't even see it. Yeah.
it's kind of bad. But I just remember kind of always being enamored. And when I think turned 10, actually it was about 2005. I moved to Los Angeles. I actually moved all over the place, but I remember the last place that I went to, I really started reading Ray Bradbury was actually 2 or 3 blocks away from where he actually lived, like my high school, the middle school that I went to, and like everyone would always talk about him. I had this one teacher, I think she was probably like a billion years old then. I'm sure she's like a billion and 1 years old now, but she would. I don't know if I guess she knew him, but she would always like talk about like, that kind man that like lives down the street, like Ray Brad. Like okay, who is this person? And that's when I kind of started to go to the library and started to like read a whole bunch and just kind of get enamored. And when I actually started working for the Walt Disney Company, I had times where I had my commutes, and sometimes I would work, and sometimes I'd have a lot of lull periods. So I would read books, and that was one of the things on the shelf. I vividly remember reading the Martian Chronicles, like backstage at Disney, and just kind of being enamored right behind Space Mountain, and just like taking in this environment. And it was a lot of fun, and it's one of those things like I kind of grew up, as well as I got to the point of where I started I took a whole class about Ray Bradbury from the brilliant Sam Weller, who was actually Ray Bradbury's biographer. And through that project, I was able to meet a bunch of people and did a lot of stuff actually about Ray Bradbury's theater work. So I met like a lot of people, interviewed people about kind of how Ray Bradbury also wrote stage plays of his stuff, and how he had a very, very vivid imagination for the stage, not only for written, literary works, but also in the stage, and kind of finding the comparing and contrasting of both of them. And even though I'm not a writer, for me, I love structure, like storytelling, and for me, that's kind of like Ray Bradbury really captures that imagination for me, is kind of how he can take a lot of concepts which we use even now, like stepping on a butterfly. That's synonymous with don't mess up time. Like it's one of those things that it's so magical when he kind of has like his things for the imagination that they just live on. He popularized the dark carnival. There's so many things that we could talk about when it comes to him, that he actually revolutionized the science fiction genre, or at least I didn't say revolutionized, but maybe popularized it in a way where it isn't just Buck Rogers, or it isn't just silly spaceman, but he actually makes you think about space and kind of our place in the universe at times, and being poetic at the same time. Because I think Ray Bradbury is also one of the best poets ever made. A lot of his prose are so beautiful. He's the only person I can think of that's similar to him is Patrick Rothfuss in many ways, but that's about it.
Wow. Yeah, I never considered it that way. I mean, I think what really drew me to Ray Bradbury, because I loved science fiction. I read like Isaac Asimov, and I loved Arthur C. Clarke especially. But with Ray Bradbury, I think I was so drawn to him because of that poetic side, and that very just that syrupy way he wrote. Then the prose is just beautiful, and it just feels like he was never constrained to like one rigid way to write. It was just like whatever happens happens. And that, yeah, it's always refreshing to read one of his books still, I think.
Yeah, and each one's vividly different, but at the exact same time. If you actually, for me, because I've studied the majority of his life to the point of where I know what his favorite ice cream is. I don't know.
Wait,
It's
what
in
is
my
it? What
birth.
is it?
It's pineapple ice cream, or a pineapple malt. He loved. Well, actually, he also ate everything, but that was he preferred. But a lot of the stuff that he talks about in his stories are autobiographical. Like you can actually pinpoint what part of his life he's actually was experiencing when he was writing like a certain short story, or things like The Small Assassin is because I'm gonna say allegedly, but I'm sure he probably did. Like he remembered his own birth,
Yeah.
and so like, yeah, there's things like he talks about, like that he kind of brings back into his stories, that a lot of his stories are pretty much autobiographical in many ways. Like The Lake is one of my favorite stories, and actually when Ray Bradbury was a kid, he went to a lake with this little girl. The little girl went in and never came out, and it kind of haunted him for the majority of his life until he actually wrote that story. And that was the first time I think I remember reading, like he cried. He said, "This is my first great short story that I ever wrote," and it's true. It launched his career in many ways.
It's a really good story. Yeah, I remember hearing about that experience he had writing it, and thinking, God, that must be a nice feeling. And he really just put his emotions. He wore his emotions on his sleeve in a big way. And I think, as somebody who didn't really do that or wasn't really told to do that growing up, it was a very like just inspirational thing to watch, I guess.
Yeah, there's like plenty of stories, especially for me. Ray Bradbury is a man after my own heart because a lot of his stories are influenced about pop culture of the 1920s and 30s, but more importantly, movie making in many ways, and a lot of his stories kind of revolve around that, or at least the magic of cinema. And it's kind of I think he's like one of the first multimedia artists that kind of you know he was the first person to grow up really with movies in many ways and the radio all the way up to television and the internet. That's a big thing too. Like he went through pretty much silent movies up to the world wide web, and that's something to think about how vast that is.
Yeah, that is pretty absurd. Like that, to see all of that and to see it all actualized in his lifetime. But I always thought like one of the reasons he was so interesting was because he kind of bridged like the low literature of like science
Mm.
fiction with like the stuff the literary critics enjoyed. And I think he kind of like towed the line a little bit there, and made, like you said, he kind of brought science fiction to like a more, I don't want to say
Res-
like a,
I'd say respectable, I guess, or kind of that's the word that I would
yeah, but
probably
I mean, I
use.
feel like he would say like he kind of showed critics that this genre was valid and valuable and wasn't to be looked down on, you know.
Yeah, it's the same as with I'd say Tolkien with fantasy, but he never really wanted to write fantasy. But there's many different things that you can extrapolate from that. But I think a lot of it is like taking science fiction seriously, because if you look at science fiction before Ray Bradbury, you had Jules Verne, you had John Carter of Mars, you had Buck Rogers, where it was more, I guess, it's kind of the conceived notion of it being like pulp fiction in many ways. And now it's just straight up, you take off the pulpy nature of it and you can take it as its own thing because, hey, science fiction fantasy is the highest grossing genre of all time. Doesn't matter what it is. I mean, you got your Avengers $1 billion thing. You got Avatar. You got Blue People $1 billion science fiction thing. And hey, this is what people remember. Star Wars couldn't have that without it in many ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I mean, to me, like science fiction was, for whatever reason, I gravitated to it. And I think I've actually found Jules Verne and H.G. Wells even before Ray Bradbury. So it felt like just like a natural extension. But I'm a little curious. What is your favorite Bradbury book or story or whatever?
Oh, for me, it's something wicked. This way comes. For me, I've always been a person that loves horror. I'm a horror person, but also it's the feeling of the dark carnival in many ways. Of me, I'm a person that loves amusement parks. I love kind of those feelings of just wonderment, but also how it can turn into sheer terror in many ways, like a thrill ride. And for me, I think the important thing about that story is that it's a story about growing up and kind of facing death head on in many ways. And for me, it's a story that kind of really enamors me in many ways. What about you? What is your favorite Ray Bradbury story or book?
Um, Gosh, I mean, I recently read Something Wicked This Way Comes for the first time. I'd kind of been putting it off for a while because I was like, "Oh, I really want to read it during October, or it was like I needed it at the right time, and I think I read it at the right time because it's one of those things that he writes so beautifully about being a kid and being young at heart too. Um, and that book just captures it so well. And yeah, there's the horror elements, but it's also just a very optimistic book. It's very hopeful just about like human beings, I think. And the way he writes about the seasons and the little
Yeah.
details about just like growing up and friendships between kids, it's so magical. And I love that book. I also love Dandelion Wine for those similar reasons.
Yeah, Dandelion Wine, that's a book that I think about. Is the way that I can describe that book is if you've ever gone out of a pool and you take a first bite of your sandwich and those like wavy chips is that's exactly like the feeling you get every time you read that book. Is kind of, the coolness of the sandwich, but the saltiness of the chips. It just hits different, I guess, is what we would say about it. But that's kind of what I think about because you bottled up. I've had dandelion wine, and I gotta say it's not that good, but you know, you still drink it and like, I guess this is okay if you got nothing else to drink.
I mean, it's like I don't have those memories of growing up, in Ohio in 1925 or whatever, but it's like him recalling these memories makes me recall, me growing up in Arizona or whatever. So
Yeah, for me, as every time that I think of that, I think about going down in Los Angeles and getting some froyo in Studio City, Century City. They're about pretty much the same, but yeah, it's like one of those things. It's the beautiful nature of the world, and especially when it comes to Ray Bradbury, I think it's kind of more lumped into Fahrenheit 451, kind of the book that started his career, but also kind of people hold him to that standard, even though it's like, oh, he only writes dystopian science fiction, but he really didn't. Some of my favorite books from him as well as his mystery books that he wrote, like Let's Kill Constance, Death is a Lonely Business, Graveyard of Lunatics. I might be getting that one wrong. Am I right? I will find out.
I think so. I think you're right.
Yeah, yeah.
But like these beautiful stories, like he did different genres in many ways, and I think that's the great thing about Ray Bradbury is that he was never lumped into just one particular genre. Yeah, they lump him into science fiction, but if you asked him, chances are he'd probably tell you that he was a fantasy writer because he's talking about things that are fantastical rather than science fiction, where it's more of like, I want to prevent this to happen. It's more of the because if you read the Martian Chronicles, everyone can breathe the atmosphere, and there's a bunch of weird stuff that happens. It's like more fantasy than you think it is than science fiction, but that's kind of the beauty of it. You kind of melded the genres together in many ways.
Absolutely. And that's why I think he's his biggest like successor is probably Stephen King, because
Mm.
I can't think of another writer
Nope.
off the top of my head who is so mixed into every single genre.
The one that I would actually pick that actually is directly influenced by Ray Bradbury is actually R.L. Stein. He actually wanted to become a writer because he read the Martian Chronicles, and there's this beautiful story that R.L. Stein actually recalls in there's a podcast. I think I'm not even sure if it's defunct, but I think it's called Crybabies, where the whole thing is like the first time you ever cried, and this was when he actually was at some book conference and he saw Ray Bradbury. And he went up to him like, "Oh my God, I love you." And Ray Bradbury, I'm paraphrasing really bad, like, "The world needs you, R.L. Stein," and R.L. Stein just started bawling. It's like this wonderful, wonderful story, but that's kind of like one of those things. There's a lot of people that are influenced by it, and I think probably you're probably right about it in many ways with Stephen King, especially when it comes to the genres and kind of like what happens there. And that's kind of the beauty of there's so much inspiration that people get that you don't even think about come from Ray Bradbury in many ways, and all the stuff he's done, especially if you look at him doing theme parks, he did pretty much, Spaceship Earth. He did a lot of stuff for Epcot. He kind of, popularized learning is cool in many ways later on in his life. And that's what I love.
Yeah, that's something I know so little about. I'd be so curious to know about his working with Walt Disney and all of that stuff. I mean, the thing is, he did so much. Like he was like a Renaissance man. He did everything. He worked with John Huston. He was working on with NASA, all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the stuff with Walt Disney is fascinating because the first time that he met Walt Disney was actually Ray Bradbury. I think this was Christmas. He saw him in a department store. Was, holy bleep! And like ran up to him. Oh my God, you're Walt Disney! And Walt Disney's like, oh, I know you. You're at the Martian Chronicles. I'd like to have lunch with you. And it was like they had lunch together, and um, Walt Disney kept him late to the point of where Walt's secretary got really upset at Ray Bradbury. Like, hey! The boss kept me. I wanted to leave. He showed me these pirate animatronics for this new ride and all these wonderful things, and it's kind of like a really fun story when it comes to Ray Bradbury and kind of that love. Like for me, um, during Halloween, they'd actually have the Halloween tree up at uh, Disneyland and Frontierland, and every year for the last, well, since 2016 until I guess this year, I used to read the Halloween tree right in front of it because that's just something nerdy that I do, and it was just kind of like the my ultimate type of. I guess the word I would put is just happiness, condensed happiness, is reading one of my favorite books in one of my favorite places.
No, I appreciate that. I think, and it's like an offering to Ray Bradbury. It's, yeah, it's like a symbolic thing. And yeah, there are things that when it's like Ray Bradbury's birthday, I have to read a short story
Mm.
or do that sort of thing. And yeah, I mean his writing advice, I keep going back to his writing advice just because that's like what has so prominently like affected me. Because like there are writers who will talk about like the craft and like the little things you have to do, but like his book Zen and the Art of Writing, which I read a long time ago at like the library, haven't been able to find a copy since, unfortunately. But the way he's able to articulate like the reasons, the motivations behind writing, the emotion you have to bring to it. I think a lot of writers are good at talking about like the technical stuff. I don't think Bradbury was very good about that, but the kind of things
Yeah.
that like help you process your emotions and put it down on page. And really, at the end of the day, it's sort of about not thinking. There's
Yeah.
only so much thinking you can do before you actually just sit and write. And that's like with any creative thing. Like you can plan and think and stew over it forever, and then at some point it's just out of your hands. You just have to let your brain loose.
Yeah, no, most definitely, especially when it comes to like the thing that I think about, which I apply to my life, is you're supposed to write with a zest and gusto
Right.
in many ways, and that's kind of the same. You gotta have your own flavors in many ways, because if you write like the same people, same 4 or 5 people that tell you, okay, first you gotta do is outline. Then if this chapter doesn't work, you can do A, B, or C, or you can do this and that. Rather than Ray Bradbury is like, no, 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 no. You write it, and then you condense or you make it longer. Or you figure out what's wrong with it once you finished it, because once you finish it, it'll be a lot easier to finish because you know that you've done it in many ways.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of people who don't like him for his advice in that way, because it is very like it's not very descriptive. It's just like, well, this is it. It's kind of a magical thing. And then he also you know I remember one thing that I always was happy to hear dispelled as a myth was he would say, like, don't start with a novel, don't write a novel, write short stories, write short stories, write short stories. And I think later on, when I was watching Brandon Sanderson lectures or whatever talking about this, and he's like, yeah, some people will say you have to write short stories before you write a novel. However, if your goal is to write novels, the only way
Write
to
novels.
practice is to write novels. And if you
Yeah.
don't have, they're totally different. If you want to be a short story writer, that's totally fine. But a lot of people, they know that there's not much of a market for short stories. Their end goal isn't short stories, so you kind of just have to write novels.
Yeah, I think when it comes to, I think it's kind of always taken a little bit out of context. I can't ask Ray about this, but I feel like his advice is more like start with short stories so you have an understanding of kind of build up, your repetition in many ways, and then start doing novels, because his fear is if you don't start writing your first, when you decide to just straight up blindly do like a novel and it's crap, you've spent 2 or 3 years writing something that you're not liking, rather than taking like a year or two or 10 to write short stories and figure out the best way to write that novel in many ways. I mean, even he wrote novels, and a lot of them are fun. A lot of them are different. Again, like if we look at, even the weird thing is Fahrenheit 451 originally started as a short story and kind of grew and became the thing that it is today. It actually started as a short story called The Pedestrian, and it grew and grew and then became The Fireman, and then Fahrenheit 451. Yeah, we actually we read it this week, and we'll talk about it very soon, because I think there's a lot of things to say about kind of that book, especially how the world is right now and just how it comes to certain things. But when it comes down to a lot of the stuff when we talks about that is kind of, you have to walk before you run, and then when you run you can sprint in many ways.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And I think also he wrote and started his career at a totally different time, totally different type
Mm.
of markets. There was a huge market for short stories. and the pulp magazines. We don't really have that anymore. So
I have like a couple short story collections, but a lot of them I don't. As much as I read short stories, it's not as much as I read novels. Now I think again things have changed, and also because there's this huge democratization of just ebooks or just easy ways to print stuff. Everyone's more incentivized to write novels rather than short stories now, and it's kind of like one of those things. When you look at Ray Bradbury, you have to look at he was a product of the time because of magazines, and that's how he made his money. And then later on in life he decided to do more than just write fancy novels or short stories. He did a lot of other things too. I think we should kind of talk about Fahrenheit 451 a little bit, and kind of just how instrumental it is in many ways, especially in recent months. People keep talking about it in many ways, and it's one of those things where it's an interesting subject. And I reread it. I read it once a year. It's like I read it usually in one sitting. What are your thoughts and opinions about the book? Or I guess it's not really a book. Is it's like a novelette or a novella in many ways. It's I don't know what the parameters are for writing when it comes to is it a novel, novelette, novelite, or whatever it is.
I don't know. It's really short. I mean, it's a quick read, and I really love Fahrenheit 451, but it's not one of my favorite Bradbury books. I feel like on some level it does feel like an extended short story, um, because there's not I don't know, I guess there's not as much of the stuff that you would expect in a novel in it, like I think it's wonderful and great, but yeah, I don't really know how to describe it. It doesn't have what some of his other novels have. I think it packs a punch, and I think that's why it's so lasting, because really has its message, and it really hammers it home.
Oh
And
yeah.
it just it leaves a really strong impression.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to burn in many ways. And it's one of those where every time that I think about certain things in my life about books or just kind of like the idea of knowledge and how knowledge in many ways can be not dangerous, but you can use it in many ways, is kind of like the central thing that I love about that book, especially when it comes to just how much people will go to, preserve knowledge. I always think about because I'm actually rereading Mistborn in many ways, and there's a character in that. Have you read Mistborn?
I
I
haven't
feel
yet. No.
okay. Then I won't spoil anything. But there's a character that they're obsessed with preserving certain knowledges and like how far they're willing to go for that. And that's something that I think about when it comes to preserving books and memorizing books and you know throwing yourself onto a burning pile of books because you don't want to you'd rather burn with them than watch them burn.
Yeah, and as somebody who owns a lot of books and is obsessed with books, I understand that feeling. I think like um wanting to die with your books. It's a novel with like so much anger and passion, and I think the reason why people still talk about it today with the likes of, like 1984 and Brave New World, is because it really can apply to so many different situations, and so there so many different people on the left, people on the right will use it as an example, like, oh, this is like Fahrenheit 451. It's just relevant in so many ways.
I think that's also kind of like one of those things. It's like the interpretation. It's more of the eye of the beholder in many ways because you can use it on both sides, and it's one of those things where it's supposed to be up to the interpretation, even kind of what it's trying to say. Like the main message, many people would say, it's about banning books. It's about certain things rather than, in Ray's opinion, in many ways, it's kind of the idea of censorship in many ways and kind of what you can say and what you can't say. It's also interesting to talk about Fahrenheit 451 because a lot of things in that Ray Bradbury actually got correct, like ATMs and stomach pumps and video billboards in many ways.
And the dogs, we're having those soon, police dogs. I mean,
Oh yeah.
seems like it's just around the corner.
Well, I mean, I always think of that now. I think about this new reread. As for some reason, my brain went from those dogs to those like the police robots, that like pill shaped, the one that jumped into the water because it killed
Oh
itself.
yeah.
That's what I was thinking about. Oh man, there's this movie called Road Tour, and it has a robot police officer. It's like a robot with like a little police cap on. There's gonna be a picture right here. It's the most adorable robot. That's what I'd want to have in Fahrenheit 451 that horribly murders people. But I think the thing that I think about when it comes to Fahrenheit 451 as well is kind of how one person can change their opinion based off of actually taking the time to actually question his very existence. I think that's, for me, it's such a powerful message of that book.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the character goes through a real transformation, and it's because there is that effort put into reading. And what is the quote that Bradbury has about, like, oh, you don't have to ban books for people to stop reading them? I mean, I think one of the things that I noticed reading at this time was, all of the screens and all of these ideas about, it's basically what they have now have is what we have now. It's just instant communication, screens, at our fingertips. We don't have walls of screens, but I mean, some of us do, but we have, right
Yeah.
in our pockets, and instant communication, entertainment constantly. However, I do think that his interpretation that books specifically will just go away, it's not happening. And I don't see it happening um, at any point, because regardless of, I do think that the information we get through visual media is just getting more complex the more we rely on it and the more we focus on it. Like, I don't know. I guess I'm not cynical in that way about, like, YouTube and TV. I think there are valuable. I don't think it's dumbing us down necessarily.
See, I look at the internet the same way as I look at a chainsaw in many ways. The internet is a tool, and used incorrectly, and you look at dumb stuff, you can seriously hurt yourself in many ways. Like, I'm a person that tries to stay off social media as much as possible, or look at, as much as I love watching videos of people literally cooking MRE military food and describing it, which is, it's fun at 2 a.m. But during the day, like, I'll watch things about, okay, how can you build this thing, or how can you learn, like, use it in a way where you're actually using it rather than hindering yourself in many ways. That's a tool. Same as how when it comes to reading a book, there's, I get pleasure out of reading pulpy books that you can find with terrible covers, but also at the exact same time you can easily switch over and read like a history book, or you can read a fantasy book, or something that's going to stimulate your brain in a much different way. There's a place for schlock, there's a place for trash, as well as there's a place to be intellectual. I mean, I joked in my last video review, even commented on my YouTube video. I love Waterworld. It's a dumb movie, but that's what makes it fun.
It's a
You
brilliant
did.
movie. It's perfect in every way.
Oh, oh yeah, yeah. It's just a little too long, but I love it. But then, yeah, but you can compare that to Mad Max Fury Road, and you get a completely different experience in many ways.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I wonder what Ray would think, like, today, about the issues of, like, fake news, social media, because to me, like, a lot of the issue, it's funny because it seems like the issue isn't lack of information or people taking away information. It's all of this information that is uh, counteracting each other, or that is just existing, operating in different worlds entirely, it seems, counteracting facts. um, I wonder what he would feel about, like, Facebook banning certain people, certain news sources. What do you think?
So for me, when it comes to this topic, I look at this kind of. I think I didn't come up with this. There was actually a YouTuber named Hello Creator that came up with this, but I kind of think about this and how I think Ray Bradbury might. I'm not, because again, I can't speak for him. This is me trying to think about when it comes to him. Is that I feel like he'd be more like you. You have to pick your own reality in many ways, because when it comes to social media or looking at the internet, we live in a world now where it used to be everyone got the same news, everyone got the same information in many ways, may it be radio, newspaper, television, newsreels of, Ray Bradbury's day. But now that we can pick and choose specifically, and if you disagree with someone, you can block them. And now you have your own different perception of reality in many ways. It's kind of like picking the right reality that you want to live in, because if people disagree with you, you can easily block someone and cancel that type of conversation and hang out with people that are very much like-minded to you compared to another faction of people that might do it. It's almost like an instant domino effect of people doing like a duel and their bullets hitting each other. Like it just cancels each other out in many ways, and it's kind of the dangers of living in the reality that you want to perceive. I guess it was it. I reject your reality and substitute my own in many ways. I think that's kind of I feel like Ray Bradbury would be in this approach is kind of if I can't speak for him again, but it's kind of like picking the reality that you want to live in. It doesn't mean spending the next 10 years in your life in a library and learning and researching. That's a possibility. Do you want to just be on social media and look at your food? That's a possibility. There's many things you can do, but it's kind of like living in the now is more important. Like for me, I think for 2021, like my motto right now is enjoy the little things in life. That's kind of what I'm doing now. Like 2020 was awful, but now looking at 2021 and things are getting progressively better in very slight ways, but you just have to enjoy the little things in life now that we taken the majority of my life looking at things for granted. Now that you have a time to like look at the roses, look at the blue sky, you can look at reality and see that at sometimes it's beautiful in many ways.
Yeah, and that's what I love about his writing is that he focuses on the little things, and he talks about how what we love about reading or art is it's not the plot necessarily or all these things. It's the asides, it's the little observations about life, about what do we take away every day. And if there's one thing I took away from 2020 and everything that happened in 2020 is that you have to really seize the moment more, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you're going to be locked indoors for a whole year, and how are you going
Yeah.
to choose to spend your time doing that. And Ray was the kind of person who said seize the day, take what you can, and appreciate the little stuff, like you said.
Yeah, because when you enjoy the little things, the bigger picture, it doesn't become blurry, but for a minute second, it's not as important as looking at a flower. It's like kind of not saying you have like pure escapism, but just being able to kind of disassociate for like a couple seconds is better for you mentally rather than just looking at social media and just doom scrolling all day. Enjoying the little things. I, I I've been much happier since I've gotten rid of social media a little bit in my life. It makes me a little warmer and fuzzier inside.
That's good. I mean, it's very much like you can get trapped in it, and in that way it is like 451 with the just the four-walled room, all these TVs, and you can just be outside your body almost. And
Mm.
it's a numbing feeling that doesn't feel good after a certain amount of time. And that's why I think we're always going to have books, we're going to have literature and art and all sorts of variety. And in fact, I feel like we have even more variety than ever today. We
Oh
have
yeah.
people who can create, who never were able to create because of technological advancements. I mean, everyone has a camera, they can become filmmakers. Everyone can write a story, everyone can read whatever they want, really. So it's I think there's a lot of hope and opportunity, but the issue isn't the means to do these things, it's the willpower.
Yeah.
And I think our generation, and future generations are going to have to deal with like what it means to live in this time when we live most of our lives on the internet. I mean, we live, I mean, now I do most things on Zoom, everything's on the internet,
Yeah.
I stare at my screen for 12 hours a day. So it's like, what does it mean to live with this going on when this is your reality? And I think people are going to have to figure that out, and there's going to be new traditions and new ways of storytelling, and I think it's all very exciting. And I think you kind of have to remember that with all of the bad, there's always this side effect. You don't know what good will come of things.
Yeah, especially when it comes down to living in the moment in many ways. I think that's kind of like as much as I love my ebooks, I think when it comes to Ray Bradbury books, I read them physically because I think the ghost of Ray Bradbury would be like, "What the are you doing? Don't read my books digitally. Read it on paper. God damn it." I mean, I guess well, I mean, Allegedly there was a store like he'd always say like ebooks were trash until I guess his publisher, I don't know, probably the person that sold the rights for the ebook version of Fahrenheit 451, and the guy's first check and he just looked like, oh, huh, maybe they're not trash. He was like looking at the them zeros.
I think there's also like
I think I'm down for these ebooks now. This is
yeah.
a good business. Yeah.
There's like a funny comic. I don't know where it is, but it was like these people doing a book burning. And I think it was for Fahrenheit 451. And the next one's like they look at the price of the book. It's expensive compared to the ebook version of it. And they look at the ebook version. They have a book burning of all the ebooks, and it just cuts to all these people died of smoke inhalation or like because of the plastic burning, rather than the books burning because they picked the cheaper option, which you can't destroy.
Right. I mean, it's funny because the whole ebook stuff, I think it's silly because it's like, well, it's a book, whatever way you read it, you know, if you
Mhm.
prefer, I like having physical copies for certain books, like you said, other books, I don't really care. Um, and, but like what would be interesting though, I do feel like in like a dystopian future where everything is getting banned, the kind of safe refuge is going to be like the physical copies of things,
Mhm.
you know, physical books, things printed on paper, your photographs that have been printed, um, actual
Yeah.
film, you know, for movies. I mean, I think about that a lot with like movies being shot on digital. Like something could happen and you could lose a ton of these movies forever, whereas you have a lot of these movies from like the 1920s shot on film where they're like, they're still, you can still use them, they've been through fires sometimes, and you
Yeah.
can piece them together and you can find negatives that have just lasted forever. That's like, you know, who knows what's going to happen with the digital stuff we have.
Yeah, it also depends when it comes to physical media. Like you brought up a good point about film stock. I love talking about this, but it depends to a certain age because film stock was made out of nitrate, which is highly, highly flammable. And it's kind of like the same thing with like eucalyptus, which we live in California where a guy scammed us out of like, oh, we'll plant eucalyptus trees. Problem though is after 100 years, oh yeah, that eucalyptus oil becomes highly flammable. That was 1920. Huh. But it's like one of those things like physical books and physical media is going to always endear in many ways. And I always think about there's this God. I heard it on NPR many, many years ago, but kind of like even with digital stuff, like people smuggling in movies or books and stuff from South Korea to North Korea just on USB drives and stuff. Like there's always going to be that pursuit of just even if things get banned, there's you can't stop it. If it's digital, that means you can make a billion copies of it. You don't need a printing press.
Many
Um,
ways.
yeah, absolutely. That it's so true. And I think that's a good thing for sure.
Yeah, there's plenty of good things, and again, it's kind of like the going from kind of like the dystopian stuff back to the wonder. Like we just had another thing on Mars recently. Like we're still doing space travel. We're still doing a lot of wonderful things, especially when it comes to Mars. For me, if I ever for some reason work on NASA, I'm gonna be like, what do you want to put in the space shuttle? The Martian Chronicles. I want to shoot that thing onto Mars just to be like, yeah, instead of a flag, just put it there. I don't care if it fades because of the atmosphere. It's gonna be there.
It
It'd
just
be
gets
great.
blown away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's a little sad that we haven't been to Mars yet. I know Ray Bradbury was very hopeful that we would get there, but you know, and the thing is, like, he was like living through a time and very active in that period where space exploration was just booming, and they were just making advancements like crazy, obviously, but it must have been disheartening for him to see, like, after the political shift, you know, after the Cold War ended, that there wasn't really, you know, people weren't exploring space just because their hearts were curious and interested, you know. It was just like, hey, we gotta prove our shit to these, you know, Russians, you know. It's like,
Yeah.
um and I think that was something he was, and maybe you could tell me like that he was very sad about, or you know, he wished that things weren't moving in that direction, I guess.
See, I don't really know how to answer this question because I don't know because he's also a man that never drove a car and only flew in a jet once. And he flew in a jet once because he had to go somewhere, and the only reason why he was able to get on was because they got him really, really, really drunk. because he had to do like some presentation. There's like a picture in the Disney hotel of him holding like a martini or something. I believe it's in the Disney hotel. I'm not sure if it's still there anymore, if the Disney hotel's even there. But yeah, he's been on a plane once in his life. It's actually fun. Like he talks about all these places, but yet he never used the car because of all. He just witnessed people dying by the automobile. He never really flew. He would take boats and trains his entire life.
Hey, I'm with them on that. Trains are great and
Yeah.
cars are dangerous as hell. I think about that a lot actually, about how he's like, yeah, I would be a murderer if you gave me a driver's license. Like I know I would kill people. Like that's good. Be self-aware about that. I mean, I think people are very like careless about driving just because
Oh, I see people all the time on their phones, and they're like paying it. Yeah,
I'm a very cautious driver because I'm always thinking like wow, like this is like the most dangerous thing I do every day, period. Like there's nothing more dangerous. It's insane how risky it is to drive, yet we're just like,
yeah. It's like a demolition derby. It's all bumper cars at this point, right? Oh no, 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 no. And it's one of those things. It's fun to like look at and talk about this stuff because Ray Bradbury. We could easily do more episodes about him because he's so fascinating, especially when it comes to just all the little things about his life that he details in his stories or just things that he talks about in many ways. And I think it's kind of like that thing. Is like there's many philosophies and principles that I think Ray Bradbury also lived by example in many ways. Like he was a child at heart in many ways. Like he, even though I think he was like a low grade hoarder in many ways because he just had junk everywhere. He collected the things that he loved and liked, and
He
did
had
you
his
ever
own.
have you ever seen it like his office stuff and like
which office, the one that he had to get or the one in his basement?
I had no idea what either one.
So I've seen the one like there's a lot of beautiful pictures of him like in his secondary office, which he had to get to keep his junk, so he would go there to write and just be alone. But he also had one in his house that was one of the rare houses in California that had a basement. That's kind of rare, but he just filled with beautiful stuff. If you actually go to the Ray Bradbury Center, I don't remember. Oh my god, it's escaping me where it is. But they actually have a lot of his stuff, and they actually recreated his whole desk and kind of his whole study. It's a beautiful place. I'm really, really, really wanted to go there. Like I was actually planning on going there last summer, but I had things kind of changed. Maybe this year, maybe next year, I'll try to go and just sit in his chair and just take in the environment in many ways.
I know that'd be so cool. It's really sad that they weren't able to like preserve his house as a museum or something,
They were going to make it a historical site, but they were just it was one of those shady dealings. They got rid of everything.
Prime property. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what happens. I was again, like I used to live by there. I'm sure I walked by that house a billion times growing up to get back to my old house. And it's one of those things that it's sad. It's just one of those things. But the difference though is the house is gone, but yet his story and his legacy is going to always endear in many ways, which is a much more pleasant thought to think about.
Yes. Very pleasant.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on here. Where can they find your YouTube channel? What type of videos do you do? Because they all crack me up and they're all so vastly different. Much like a Ray Bradbury story, you don't know what you're going to get until it's the last second. Why don't you do your pitch?
Thanks. Thank you, Zach. And thank you so much for having me on. I love talking about Ray Bradbury. I'm sure we could talk for hours more. You're going to have to show me your Ray Bradbury collection soon because
Oh yeah.
I am green with jealous rage right now, but trying to hide it. And yeah, so man carrying thing. I make videos about fantasy writing, books, Cosmere, skits, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, just look up man carrying thing.
Sweet. Well, where can they find you on social media and anything else? Do you want to plug anything coming up new? Things coming cool?
No. Oh.
No. I'm
Nothing
just imagine.
cool. Nothing cool coming up. Just expect very little.
Oh, I was expecting the camera to pan over and just have Brandon Sanderson there. He's just like writing a book.
I'm doing a little collab with Brando Sando. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I actually commissioned him to write all my jokes now. he now does all the jokes for Lyft.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's
Or,
cool.
yeah, it's fun.
Well, everyone, thank you all so. Well, everyone, thank you all so much for watching this. I really appreciate it. If you like this, maybe consider giving a thumbs up, subscribing down below.
Subscribe to Middle Fantasy. Do it or die. I mean, I won't. It's not a threat. It's not a threat. It's just suggestion.
It's implication.
An implication. Yeah.
Yeah. I just feel like there's going to be like Man Carey things is just gonna have his own secret police. I don't want to subscribe to him, and you just see like a little red dot said, okay, I'll subscribe.
Send my metallic hounds.
Oh yeah, exactly. No, my police robots. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. And like always, everyone, may your food and drink ever be tasteful, and may your books be filled with fantasy and adventure. But more importantly, live forever, everyone. Bye.